Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. Marcus Aurelius.
For death remembered should be like a mirror, who tells us life's but breath. To trust it, error. William Shakespeare.
Sometimes, even to live is an act of courage. Seneca.
Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. The boy band Justice Crew.
They didn't say that first.
Mate, they were pioneers in that space, you know. So you gotta be strong, live by the words of the song. So together is where we belong.
Here, look, I found it. It's Doris Day singing it in the Alfred Hitchcock film The Man Who Knew Too Much, released 1955.
Oh, fair enough. Learn something new every day.
Yeah, I was right. You were wrong. Boom. Another point to James. I'm putting this on the tally.
No, that's it. I'm taking this stupid whiteboard off the fridge. It's too competitive.
You're only saying that because you're losing.
I bought this whiteboard as a shopping list, and you corrected me one time about eggplant really being called aubergine. Now the board is full of tallies.
Oh, crap. I forgot the eggplant from Coles.
I was right!
I actually have now, so for those that don't know, aubergine is the English way of saying eggplant.
It's like courgette instead of zucchini,
yes,
right?
That's like, it's the same brand of thing. I still call courgettes, but I
like
finally started calling eggplants and not aubergines. I got so much crap for it. Like, it seems such a weird thing to be bullied about in high school, but I actually did. It was bizarre.
I think aubergine's a much cooler sounding word than eggplant. I mean, it's French. It's
the way
definitely
it's
French.
spelt as well, French spellings of words are always
very sexy to bring us back to life.
Enchanté, Sean Connery.
Oh my
Funnily
God.
enough, we're recording these two episodes on 2 different days.
Our minds are still in that exact same place. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast. It's the GCP brought to you by POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast, where balloons don't hurt you. I'm your host, Walt.
Sorry, I actually hadn't read that before now. Hello, Commander players. I'm just a man standing in front of another man, asking you, the listeners, to love us. James. Lots of movie references in this episode already, which is great.
Look, before we get to the transmission, we do have that same giveaway we spoke about last week, and we can now tell you what all of the prizes are for this giveaway, because we've heard back from Palms Off Gaming, the sponsors of this podcast. So, in addition to the complete set of the Allied Talisman Secret Lair by Dan Frazier,
which
very cool looking.
So cool.
We love the ones that we
pulled.
pulled.
Picked it up at CanCon.
Yep. We can tell you which Fallout pre-constructed deck you'll be getting. It's Science, the one that James played on stream just the other night.
And nearly won with...
Very close.
Nearly, I came second. I was the second person alive.
We couldn't touch the radiation deck, to be fair.
It was so good. Shout out Brad, who won that stream.
He played it very well, definitely. Yeah. We're still giving away that Murders at Karlov Manor collector booster. And now, thanks to Palms Off Gaming, we'll be giving you a black Genesis deck box. That'll fit one commander deck in it.
Very nice.
A set of black blackout sleeves.
That's my favorite sleeves on the market.
Yep, you can sleeve up your Fallout deck, maybe, in those. A set of inner sleeves from Palms Off Gaming, and a turquoise 4-pocket binder.
It's a pretty big stack of stuff.
It's a big haul.
This is a mega giveaway, but the reason why we've made it so big is because we really, really want you guys to engage with the reason we're doing this giveaway, and that's because we've got a poll, a feedback form, if you would, some market research for Walt and I, to ask you, the listeners, of what you think of Get Commanded, specifically of our episodes, us as people, the stream,
the YouTube
the
videos,
structure, the length of things, and basically just any ideas that you have. We want to hear about it all. It'll take you probably less than, maybe about 10 minutes, not even.
10, 15 minutes, I would say.
Really quick to fill out, but we want to hear from you, because the only reason that this podcast is a podcast and not just Walt and I talking in the room is because you listen to it. You're the ones that actually do it and make it a thing. So yeah, we want to hear from you of what makes you excited about the content that we make.
Totally. And you'll have some, like some measure of control over what happens with the podcast moving forwards. Like, we're not going to do absolutely everything that is said in the poll. But, if we hear that there's a certain sort of episode that you guys like a lot, certain forms of content you guys want us to explore, we'll probably just do it. So, yeah, please fill out the poll. It'll be at the very top of the show notes of this episode. And even if you're not interested in the giveaway, we'd really appreciate it if you could do it anyway. And at the very end of the poll, there is a free-form question box. Mm-hmm. So if you have any questions for me and James that you'd like us to answer, we'll be looking at doing those in an upcoming Q&A. So definitely fill out the whole poll and get to that last question so you can shoot us a question and we can answer it for you. There's already some excellent questions
yes.
in there.
I looked at it the other day and was like, oh, is that a Q&A episode or is that a whole episode in and of itself?
Which we have done before as well. So if it's a really great question, it may end up, if the Space Commanders deem it so, an episode of its own. And speaking of the Space Commanders, we do have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
Made your way to the final stage of your philosophical explorations of each of the 5 colors in Magic the Gathering. Your final assignment is to look at the color green. What are its desires? Who are its enemies? And who does it align with?
Final stage.
Yeah.
The boss battle, if you would. The boss battle.
And it's this other space commander again who's very fascinated with color specifically.
And the philosophy behind it. Yeah. Which is always a fun talking point for you and I, because we're both huge philosophy nerds.
Absolutely. And we're back into my territory now in green, of course.
Yeah, we're back in home turf for you. Yeah. I feel like you're gonna have a lot more to contribute to this episode than the previous red episode, which was very me.
I would argue that the previous 3 episodes were delving exactly into your territory of Grixis. Blue, black, and red.
Grixis color pie.
We're back in my territory. I'm hyped.
That's good. I'm really glad that you're hyped about this one because green to me is very special as a color. I think green is very different to the other colors. I know that we said last episode that red was incredibly different from all the other colors, but I think green has something very unique about its philosophy that kind of is a contrapoint to all the other 4 colors, because green is different in the way that all the other colors look for change or advancement in some way. So like white, for example, we talked about peace. These are like Mark Rosewater's one-word sum-ups for each color.
What does the color want?
Yeah.
And I'm with you in that. Yeah, so white was peace.
Yep.
Blue, we had perfection, and this was usually both internal and external. Perfect the thing you're making, but mostly perfect yourself.
And technology focused.
Yep. Black was all about power.
Correct. Yep.
Achieving power, maintaining power.
So it can use it to influence whatever it wants. Like it knows that power is the key to change.
Yeah. And red was about freedom.
Yeah,
right?
which is basically change in breaking the bonds of restraint. Like, you're changing the world. But green doesn't actually want any of that.
No.
Green is all about, Mark Rosewater's one word for green is acceptance. And I think that word sums up green so perfectly.
But it's so interesting because when you look at the other 4 one words that we just supplied there, they're very tangible and things you can grasp, and achieve.
They're goals.
Yeah,
they're aspirational,
and they're usually long term. Well, not always, but peace is something you have to work towards, and perfection is the same. Power is something you have to maintain and strive towards. Even freedom, red chases freedom in the here and now, but in practice, as we know, freedom usually takes a long time to truly achieve. But green wants acceptance, which you can kind of find any time.
And also, I think the only time you can really find acceptance, or the time that you find acceptance most, is now.
Yeah.
And it's red is all about now, but it's also about 5 seconds into the future.
Yes.
And I think that's the difference. It's what do I want now? Because I don't have it yet, but I will get it. Green is what I've got now is perfect.
Well, it's interesting. It's it's something I can get right now, but in order to maintain acceptance, it's an ongoing thing, right? So I guess that green, and we're probably going to get into a lot of this, but green's kind of cyclical in this way, where it's like accept. It's almost like a mantra, you know?
Yeah, mantra. I hadn't thought about that like cyclical mindset of like just accept it, just accept it. Just it's
something
like a
happens,
repeating.
accept it. Something happens, accept it. Yeah,
I think like green not only wants acceptance, but I think it already has acceptance.
Yeah.
And if you're wondering, like, accepted what? That's a great question. It's everything.
Yeah.
I think, and everything includes the world itself, like how the world is, what powers lay it be, what creatures exist, what trees grow. Like, we're going to talk about nature a lot in this episode, obviously, but even power structures. Green just believes that the world kind of naturally builds like a hierarchy, and you know, like there's a food chain in the animal kingdom, and green's like. That's perfect. It's perfectly balanced.
We don't need to touch that at all. We can leave that exactly as it is, and things will sort themselves out.
Yeah. I think that for green, every individual is born with everything that they need in life. So this is like we're all part of this beautiful machine that is life. You know, we're all... I know this sounds very blue, but that might be my influence of being more blue and red focused. But like green sees this like beautiful machine that's cogs and like all fits together perfectly. Yeah. And all of us are cogs in that machine. That sounds incredibly blue. I'm seeing my like influence here, but green might not see it as a machine, but it sees it all as a web. A web where it makes much more sense. We're all strings on a web.
Yeah.
And we're all intertwined perfectly, and all of us have a part to play in the beautiful world that we call life.
And I think the key thing as well here, and speaking of blue, I know that when Mark Rosewater describes the conflict between blue and green, because we'll get into this later, but they are enemies, is that blue is all about nurture and green is about nature, in terms of that classic argument of like, are you a product of your environment? Are you a product of your environment, or are you a product of, literally who you were born to be? Yes. And green is firmly in the nature camp, right?
Yes.
No matter what happens to you and your environment, you will be the person you're destined to be. And you don't have to do anything about it, which is where this acceptance comes from, right? It's like, you were born exactly with, as you said, with everything you need, with all the tools at your disposal. You don't need to worry about like what you learn and who you surround yourself with, because you will find your place in the world.
Yep, it'll just happen. As Justice Crew once said, que sera, sera. Look, I think we should, before we go into the philosophy more, we should probably outline, as we've done with all the other colors, of like what green cares about, what it represents, what it shows within its world, like what stuff we see on cards, that kind of thing. So I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is life. I think green is teeming with life and like all forms of life, right? Humans, creatures, plants, all this kind of stuff. And it really cares about new life. It really cares about birthing new things. And I think that the reason why it cares about it so much is every new life is a new contributor to this machine, this web that the world is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think equally, like, once something is, it loves when new life is brought into the world, but it also loves when that new life grows, right?
Yes, that's probably its like most... I'm doing this kind of thing. It's growing.
That's probably the way. The way that green will go out and do something is it'll be like grow.
Yes.
Things need to grow.
Here's some water.
I will help things to grow, but they will grow on their own. It's that kind of give and take there.
I think it will grow on its own, but green isn't scared of encouraging growth.
No,
because
definitely
it knows
not.
that it's natural.
It's kind of like, I guess the green. If we're in green's head, we might look at it and go, in order for you to reach your potential, you need some help.
Yes.
You have that potential in you. I'm not changing that, but I'm helping you to reach it.
I'm just giving you a little bit of water.
Yeah.
A little bit of water's not nothing crazy.
A little bit of water never hurt anybody.
It's not like I'm...
But a lot could kill you. Quote, Jumanji. We did it. We quoted Jumanji 14 minutes into an episode.
We've got Alfred Hitchcock, James Bond, and Jumanji all in the same episode.
And Justice Crew, don't forget that.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So important.
We've nailed the references so far. Look, I think some other things that we see in green cards is obviously like flora and fauna. I think that ties perfectly with life and growth.
Yeah.
Both flora and fauna grow, they adapt, they're living.
Yep.
But I think the thing that stands out a lot that I think people miss because it's not as obvious, green is very obsessed with tradition and also ancestry. And I think this is a little bit more obvious when you start to break down why. If you're looking for a great example of what the world actually is, the best thing to look at is what the world has been with everything that has influenced it.
Yeah.
There is no better representation of what happens in the world than what has happened in the world.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I mean, it's about when your obsession is maintaining the status quo, which is kind of maybe to a fault. Green does this, right?
We'll talk about that.
But when that's the thing that you're working towards, you need to understand the status quo.
Yes.
And that's usually going to involve, traditions, the way people are doing things today that is based on what has also been. And ancestry is going to be what I was born to be will be a product of who my parents are and who their parents are.
I think Green, even though it probably doesn't care much about the science of it all with DNA and stuff, Green loves DNA. Like, it's like, obviously DNA influences because that's what the world is. That's what you were born to be because your parents met in the beautiful web of life and you became the next little web string that spawned off them. Like, it's quite beautiful when you think about that.
Oh, absolutely. There's something very comforting about Green schools of thought, which I'm sure we'll go into.
Yes. I think lastly as well for me, the thing that Green is really interested in is how each individual in the world has all of this potential in them. So you can go, okay, well, it's an individualist. I don't think it is. I think it's actually leaning towards community because community is about a group of individuals. We all have our own purpose and stuff, but Green cares about how those purposes and how those like roles that we all play intersect and affect the world at large. So Green generally goes, okay, individualism, fantastic. You can be happy with your life, but maybe you should be happy with your life within the world and within this community in the world.
I mean, I think you can look at the sort of human relationships that are a community through exactly the same lens that Green approaches an ecosystem, right? Like Green looks at the natural world and the interactions between predator and prey and all those kinds of things and says, this is natural, this is how things should be. And in the same way, looks at itself and goes, well, I have a place in the world and I have a system that I belong in. And in terms of people, that's going to resemble a community, right? Like people giving and taking from one another. But
a wolf pack, but with people that stand on two legs.
Green loves a wolf pack, I would say.
100%. All right. So that's a good image of what Green is. I think we've got Green in our heads. We're looking at trees. We're looking at plants and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So what philosophical concept have I chosen for us to unpack today?
I was very interested in what you would choose this time.
I am actually very excited specifically to talk about this with you for a very obvious reason that you'll get in a second. We're going to talk about Stoicism.
Yes!
The reason why Walt is so excited about Stoicism, this was one of the first things we spoke about as friends, really.
Yeah.
When we moved in together, you had just completed a year or two ago.
Oh, it was only a few months back that I fully graduated. So this was part of my honors thesis at university. So I did 3 years of uni. I was having such a great time. I thought, why not I'll do a 4th?
Screw it, more. Do it again.
I was literally just like, wasn't ready to leave yet, to be completely honest. But I did it. It was a honors by coursework. So basically at the university I was studying at, either you could do an honors thesis that was, I think, 16,000 words, and you'd spend pretty much the whole year writing that. There were a couple of subjects to help you with research methods and that kind of thing. But mostly you were just independent research. You had a supervisor. That was it. You're writing your thesis.
At the end of it all, there was a big essay that someone had to read and go, tick.
Yeah. Or you could do this 8,000 word honors as coursework, honors with coursework, and you would still write a thesis, and I wrote an 8,000 word thesis, but I also created a project, and the project formed a big chunk of the thesis. So the project that I did, I was interested in my thesis in the relationship between philosophy and theatre, which was the area that I was studying at uni. And so I decided to adapt the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius,
which, by the way,
Emperor of Rome.
if you were a keen listener, the first quote that we said in the skit was a Marcus Aurelius quote.
It was indeed. And I noticed you snuck in some Seneca.
I did sneak in Seneca.
Arguably Aurelius's biggest inspiration for his school of thought. So basically, Marcus Aurelius wrote they called his meditations because they probably were intended only for himself.
I don't think he ever thought anyone would read them.
No.
It's like a Dear Diary.
Yeah.
Today I thought about Stoicism.
But like in embedded in philosophy. So it was like, you know, when someone says this to you, you must reply in this kind of a way.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like, you know, they're almost a bit mantras to himself. Like, these are things that I will live by. These are my principles. And there was a principle of Stoicism called ascesis, which was basically that you, in order to engage in your philosophy, you needed to actively practice it.
Yeah, and that I would love to talk about that with you again, because we spoke about that quite a lot in lockdown and talking, because we, you know, when Walt and I like moved in together, we went into lockdown pretty immediately. So I read parts of Walt's thesis and was interested in all of this. And we both together, I think, embraced Marcus Aurelius's Stoicism during that time, because we were like...
We needed it during COVID. Holy cow. It's the perfect school of philosophy for COVID-19.
We can't affect the world around us, but we can accept the fact that it exists. And that's exactly what Stoicism is. If you're not familiar with Stoicism, Stoicism is the philosophy, the school of thought. This is a very big umbrella of school of thought. We've talked a lot of different philosophies, but I think Stoicism is probably the most active and probably most well-aligned school of thought to a color that we've yet experienced.
Yeah, I think with other colors we've adapted like ideas within philosophy.
Yes.
Like, you know, what's the blank page, the blue philosophy? There was like a Latin word, Latin phrase. I can't recall now. Something blank. Anyway, basically meant blank page. Yeah. But yeah, like this is a full school of philosophy that existed for a long, long time.
And the sick thing about like talking about this, it's one of my favorite content creators on YouTube is Abigail Thorne, who runs Philosophy
Tube. Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah, she did this great video on Stoicism. I've actually linked it in the show notes, so you guys can check it out.
I have seen that video, and it is fantastic.
It is great. Yeah. She says in that video, it's like getting a high five through time, because these ideas were thought about in ancient Greece. Marcus Aurelius was an ancient Roman.
He was an emperor of Rome, yeah.
Yep, and he is thinking about the same kind of stuff that we had to think about in lockdown in 2020.
Oh,
it's beautiful.
It's reassuring in the same way that, I'm going to be wanky here and say Shakespeare is reassuring.
Yes.
Which is that, you know, but even more so potentially, because Shakespeare, you know, 300, 400 years ago or whatever, but like the things that happen in Shakespeare plays and people being like, man, that guy's acting like a bit of a dick. And you're kind of like, yeah, he is. Oh my God, Shakespeare got it, you know?
But, he understands me.
But like, it's the Stoics are like, you know, when you know someone's out in the world and talking ill of you, you have to accept that you can't change them. And it's like, oh my God, people have been gossiping for thousands of years.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. So yeah, that is effectively what Stoicism is. Stoicism is the art. I'm going to call it an art because it's a practiced profession, in my opinion, because a lot of Stoicism is practicing what you preach. It's the art of acceptance. And I mean, colloquially today, the term stoic, being stoic, is used to describe someone that's like calm under pressure, doesn't break. But I really want to dive into the origins of Stoicism for this episode, because I think the being a Stoic is like, yeah, cool. Stoicism in that way, we understand what it means today. There's a lot more that's going underneath it.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that is lost in that description of a Stoic is like, they're just naturally that way. It's usually when it's like,
he was born like that.
Yeah, if someone says James is very Stoic, it doesn't sound like an active thing. It's like, that's part of, you know, in the same way I might say James is very clever, or James is very, James is very tall. Like it's like it's like I'm describing a physical property of James, whereas
it's just part of me.
Yeah, the really important thing about this school of philosophy was that it was practiced, right? It was like an active thing. They knew that you couldn't just go, I'm gonna not worry.
Yes,
you couldn't just do that. You had to actively practice.
Well, there's like the whole origin of Stoicism is from Zeno of Cyprus. Unfortunately, Zeno didn't do a lot of writing himself, which is a bit unfortunate, but we do know from a lot of other people referencing him in ancient Greece that he was kind of the birthing of this thought process. And supposedly, he was a very wealthy merchant. He had a lot, and he was very well off, and he lost pretty much everything in a huge shipwreck.
Right.
And he ended up with nothing. So instead of being very defeatist about it all and rolling over and being like, wah, my life sucks, he became very interested in philosophy.
Right.
And he started reading a lot of Socrates. He started doing a lot of research, went to school, and started teaching. And he founded the school of philosophy known as Stoicism.
Cool.
And so, like, nowadays where we see being a Stoic as like a state of mind or an attitude, the core foundations of the philosophy were about understanding and, more importantly, accepting this unbreakable web of cause and effect. And this is where Zeno really kind of put the foundations of this school of thought in, of the world is the world. We can't really change it. So this is what they believe to be the reason and the rationale of why the world works, because everything is perfectly intertwined.
Yeah.
In ancient Greek, this was actually referred to as the logos. Philosophy Tube does a really great segment of this in her video. You should really check it out. She refers to it more as the force from Star Wars.
Yeah. It had physical properties. Like, they didn't understand the ways that things were constructed, and so I think, like a lot of us, when you look at a person, you go, there's no way that a person, like all the things that make a person, they can't be physical things.
Yes.
You know,
like
they didn't know what a neuron was or like all of these things. And so naturally, when you look at a person, you go, there is something there's an essence that's making someone human that a stone doesn't have and an animal doesn't have. And for them, that was this part of this cognitive realm that existed alongside our own. And logos was like the property that was this.
This was straight up science back then.
Yeah,
and the wild thing is they basically just thought like the force from Star Wars was real. That's what they thought. They thought that it was this kind of unseeable and intangible thing that was affecting all of us.
Yeah.
So Stoicism was about accepting that and about being like, okay, well, we can't influence that. So how do we live our lives in accordance to that?
Trust the Force, Luke.
Yes, use the Force, Luke. So we can't influence that. The other colors think that they can.
Right.
And I think that's the difference with green. That's what we started this episode with, was the other colors are looking at changing the structures of the universe. Whereas green's all about that kind of like, let's deal with it as it is. So I think that green looks at all the other colors, and we'll talk a little bit about this more, and it goes, okay, well, this is all idealism, sensationalism, even political realism. Remember when we talked about that with black?
Yeah, true.
Even political realism, you say realism, it's not. It's about like obtaining something.
There are still goals,
changing something.
Sure.
So green's all about that. All right, this is what it is. Let's keep it as is. And the philosophy of green is about looking at that world and going, how do I, within the world, live so I'm fulfilled?
And look, like, I think it'd be very easy to dismiss this as an idea based on the fact that we know that logos does not exist.
We now know that science is not the force.
No. And so it would be very easy to go like, oh, well, obviously there isn't a supernatural force that is dictating the way that our lives are lived and the way that our thoughts go. We know that's not the case, but there are still things that influence our world and what happens in it that we don't have control over. And so you can still approach the world and say, look, I can make a difference in the world, but there's a lot of things I don't have control over, and I'm going to need to have some kind of attitude towards these things I can't change. And that's where Stoicism comes in and says, well, accept it then.
Yeah, and I think the attitude is a great word. I really like attitude. It's about the way you approach things instead of things affecting you. So I think the great thing about Stoicism for me is that it's like taking a step back. You know when your parents go, okay, take a step back, think about everything. That is the whole philosophy. It's like, okay, I'll use Philosophy Tube's example.
Sure.
She had a audition that she was going for, right?
Okay.
She was freaking out, and she was like, okay, I'm freaking out. Why am I freaking out? Let's take a step back. There is a core assumption that underlines that fear, right? And it's this fear that if I don't get this job, if I don't get this part, my career is over. That's not true.
No.
That's not true. So once you look at that and go, that is an irrational thing, and you start being very rational about it, you can start it almost without effort. Once you go and go, that is not true, without effort, you start to feel a bit better, right?
I mean, it's pretty funny that, like, this does not it doesn't look dissimilar to cognitive behavioral therapy, which we know works.
Yes.
Like, this is part of psychology, which is science, and is a thing that happens to you in therapy that, like, can improve your life, is basically this, right?
Yep.
Look at the things that are happening in your brain emotionally. Think about the underlying, if you put it into words, what's the words that are being said in your brain, and then go, is that really true? And usually the answer is definitely not.
Definitely not.
This is based on some feeling I have towards this that is not the case. Like, yes, I might not get this part, and that might feel bad to not get this particular opportunity to perform, but does me not getting this part change the parts I might get in the future? No.
Or the parts I've already done and how well I did in those.
No, it's completely independent of all of that. So the thing you're picking it apart and finding the mistake you're making and going, that's a mistake, and I can let go of that.
And you're even tracking it back to the logos and how everything kind of intertwines and all this kind of stuff. You're going, well, this intertwines to this. Yes, I get that because it's acting and it's a role that I'm auditioning for. But look how far away on the web of logos this is. Like, if I pluck this string, the vibrations that it's going to make over there is next to none.
Minimal.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Look, I think that a lot of people end up looking at Stoicism. And look, there's a part of Stoicism I really don't want to go into because I do actively despise some of the people that exist in the current school of thought of Stoicism.
Right.
People like Andrew Tate.
Sure.
That are like, this is I think actually Philosophy Tube referred to it as broicism. Of like, I'm going to be just completely a brick wall, no emotions. No, I'm going to have no values and just deal with life as it comes. No one's going to affect me. This is not what Stoicism is. This is a fake version of Stoicism. And a lot of people look at like people like that and either go, right, Stoicism is either an asshole that is like a brick wall with no emotions. That's not true.
No.
But it's also not true that it just rolls over and says, okay, fine, to anything. Green actually has this kind of philosophy in itself that it wants to be a positive being in the world. It wants to be good. It wants to have, being a Stoic doesn't mean you're just accepting being a bad, evil person or something like that.
No, it's about accepting the things you can't control. But if you can control things and be good, then you should be good.
Yes, and 100%. And there are four, they're like referred to as cardinal values or cardinal virtues that Stoics live by to basically lead what they believe to be a good life.
Okay.
There's wisdom. Makes sense. We've already kind of spoken about like the learning from the past kind of stuff.
Be wise, be aware of the things around you.
Temperance is a big one. This is obviously what we've been talking about a lot of, like, no matter what kind of affects you, approach it with temperance. Very kind of
temper the things that happen to you.
Correct.
The things that happen to you will not affect you that greatly. Yeah, sure.
Justice is the other one.
Okay.
Justice being less about like ruling a court of law as we would see in like White, for example. Justice for Green is more about like treating everyone equally, even if they've done wrongdoing.
Right.
Treating them with like a fair justice.
It's more coming from the word just. Like, be just towards people. Be fair. Be reasonable with people.
Yeah, this is how you live your life. So I guess being just is a better way of describing it than justice.
Yeah, because we're justice. The word justice has a bit of a tainted feel for us because we like the word justice system.
Yeah, we have a law.
That's the law, and the law is an external thing. But yes, in terms of being just, if you want to be a just person, then yes, it's not about the external justice system.
Yeah, 100%. And the final one is, in fact, I think Seneca put this brilliantly. Courage.
Right.
And green, for me, is like a very courageous color. I know that we think a lot like red is like this brooding, out there first. But Seneca said, as I said at the start of this episode, sometimes even to live is an act of courage.
Yeah.
And I think that is quite a beautiful thing to think about. Like, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to put it on a public platform. I've been in a pit recently. I've been in a really hard time. And I, like, getting ready for this episode, seeing the Space Commanders say, right, green is going to be the color philosophy that you're going to dive into, made me read a lot of Stoicism and made me kind of look at it. And I read some Seneca and was like, hey, wow. That was like getting a high five through time from an ancient Greek being like, hey, dude, I understand.
It's okay. I get it.
This.
I've been there. Yeah.
I've been there.
Totally.
So I think that, like, all of these four virtues, wisdom, temperance, just, courage, these are the things that green does, right? And this is the thing that I think like a lot of the modern Stoics forget with their approach of Stoicism. Sure. They forget that you can't just be like, well, fuck it, I'm looking out for number one.
Yeah.
That's Black's philosophy.
Yeah.
That's political realism that we spoke about in that episode.
That's not being just.
No. But I think when you've mastered these 4 virtues, and Stoics refer to this, as a sage. They refer to the sage, this person that has reached this kind of height of almost, you can see this, this is a very Western philosophy, but you can see this represented in Eastern philosophies, like Buddhism, nirvana. This is reaching a point of like, nirvana. It's like there's not a great English translation for nirvana, but
no, I see the comparison for Buddhism, which is that I think like the surface level interpretation of both these philosophies is it's about ignoring the world. Which is not the case. It's about accepting the world the way that it is. And there is an ideal state to reach in both of these philosophies, which involves not being ruled by the world around you, right?
Yeah.
Like Buddhism is a lot of Buddhism is about not letting the things you do and the things you eat and the things like the people around you have a hold over you. It's about being free from those things.
Yeah, and your soul is independent of that influence. Yeah,
and it's not dissimilar to Stoicism, which is working, towards being a sage, and the sage is not affected by the people around them and by the things that happen to them and by the things they eat, maybe, it's quite a similar state of mind that's being aimed for, I think, which is being free from the weariness of the world.
It's kind of wild that these two sides of philosophy, Eastern and Western philosophy, share such similar. It's so human to share these similarities because, back in ancient times, these parts of the world weren't talking to each other.
No.
Do you know what I mean? So they were
very, very minimally.
Yes, like maybe some traders, in Roman times.
Silk Road, is basically the only way.
All right, so now we've got an idea of what green represents, what it looks like, and the philosophy of Stoicism behind it. What strategies does green use within its life? We talked about those 4 kind of virtues, but I think we can talk more tangibly in this section of the podcast.
We're back in green again.
Yes.
We're in Stoicism. We're using that as the lens that we're approaching green through, but we're still back green.
Yes. So what does green do? Well, green, if others don't see nature will come to them, and green brings nature with it wherever it goes. Green will walk the road with animals and walk a naturally paved path because animals have walked it before it. Do you know what I mean? Whereas instead of paving a road through a forest, green will walk the tracks that animals have left for it.
This is very Buddhist again, to be honest. It's very, I remember I think my dad might have visited a Buddhist temple, and he said there was this massive trail of ants through the temple, and everyone was leaving it. They were stepping over. The reason there was this huge trail of ants is they were going, well, they deserve to be here too, and everyone was just stepping over the ants.
If anything, we might have been a bit wrong building the temple in the first place.
Look, we've intruded on their space, so we better let them do their thing.
It's incredibly, and this is the thing that I think is another thing that green believes, because green isn't trying to, wield a tree as a sword.
No.
Green believes that nature will take its course. And I think that, firstly, that requires a lot of trust from green. I think that as an individual in the world, trusting an other thing, definitely a thing that doesn't think, being nature, you have to trust it a lot. So green will often play in those spaces with animals and living in the wild. It will even find itself living in the wild. While many of us would hear wild and think, oh, that's going to be crocky, mate. Watch out for that croc. It'll get you. Green believes that the croc is simply doing what the croc does.
Yeah.
And if you don't get in its path, you can actually be the crocodile's ally. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And this is you can think about the fact that magic is always based on the idea that you are a being wielding green magic, right? You are not yourself green. So if you think of yourself in that way, what are the tools that green uses when in its magic? They're the creatures, right?
Yes.
It's the forest and the animals in there.
Super, super green.
Yeah.
I think we'll talk about how it plays out in a game of Commander later. But that is 100% the most green thing is creatures and the land.
Yeah, and if you are in tune with the land, then it sort of makes sense that you are likely to be its ally. Yeah, and so in a way that Black might like to kill kill a creature and use its innards, right? Like we see Viscera is a black card that is like trying to see the future through viscera, like the guts of something. Green is going, no, leave the creature alive. That can kill my enemies.
And also, like, leave the creature alive, let it walk, and hey, look, it found me water that I needed to live.
Exactly.
I really appreciate this creature. I think that this is something that I think that green is the most weirdly streetwise of all of the colors. Do you know what I mean? Like,
it's a very like if green was D&D, it would have very high wisdom and very low intelligence.
Yes, exactly. It is 100%. It is wisdom over intelligence, and I think that a lot of that comes from its obsession, as we spoke about, with history and tradition and even ancestry, because the lessons that we learned from the past can be applied when needed. It's like, I've seen this before in nature. Like, let's say we look at a food chain.
Yeah.
And we go, okay, what can we learn about a food chain? Okay, predators sit at the top. All this kind of stuff. You learn how societal structures work.
Yeah.
And I think that comes through in Magic so often with green, being able to go, right, I understand how the way the world works, so I can sit within it correctly. I can kind of weave my way through it without tripping over it. Like Red goes, the way the world works, it doesn't matter. I'm going to punch this building. And then the artifact it's trying to break has indestructible written on it. And it's like, bollocks.
Yeah. But green, I see what you mean. It's much easier to survive in a world that you understand.
Yes.
And green absolutely understands the world around it because it's actively looking at it and trying to find its place in it. And so, it's much easier to navigate a world and find, the things you need and the things you need to survive. And if you understand the world around you. And if you're looking at the world around you all the time and going, what is it about this thing? I need to understand this better.
But also looking at the past and understanding what happened in the past to go, hey, that happened, so surely it's still kind of happening now.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom to be gained in doing that. Yeah.
And I think finally, this is probably like its strongest strategy, is that it doesn't limit itself. This is one of the things that green does so well. And like, we looked at black and we looked at red that also share this in common, and maybe this is where green can like those two colors a little bit, where they don't limit themselves. But green is not only not limiting itself, it's not limiting nature around it.
No.
It's not limiting the world, and if anything, it will help it grow. So like a tree will grow as tall as it can without a lid on it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Animals over time will evolve and become stronger. Like, the wolves with bigger teeth that fight better will eventually breed, and over time they will become bigger and stronger wolves.
Yeah.
Green lets that happen and encourages it, and simply sometimes by clearing away some objects that are unnatural in its path. We'll go into this later.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Sometimes by just removing that and giving it the space to breathe will allow nature to grow. Have you ever heard of the flea in a box theory?
No.
So there was... this has actually been studied.
Oh, I know this one. Yeah. I do know this one. Where the flea... If you put a flea in a box, it'll keep jumping to try and escape the box, but it'll keep hitting the ceiling.
Yep.
But after a certain amount of time... When you remove the box, the flea won't jump that high anymore.
Because it believes that's its limit.
That's the limit that it can have. But I see what you mean. So for green, green is the flea.
Green is the flea, yeah.
And green wants to remove the box. And green wants the box to have never been there in the first place.
Yes.
Green wants that flea to be able to reach its full potential. And it knows that these obstructions you place on nature will stop it from doing that.
100%. That's exactly what I was trying to go for. Perfect. Nailed it. All right, we've been talking a lot.
We have been talking a while. Might be time for a thrifty interlude.
Yeah, it's a thrifty interlude, and because we're in green, this is the thrifty interlude where we're going to reach Nirvana, so say it with me.
You joke. It's a bit that way. So we're going to talk about, obviously, green's flaws, its enemies, its allies, and how it plays out in Commander. But before that, we're going to hear a little something about a thrifty card. And this week, we're breaking tradition, and James is going to join me for a performance of a dialogue.
I feel like you say we're breaking tradition, but I come into these interludes
it happens
every now and
then. Look, I would say the norm is the monologue.
The norm is the cowed merchant.
Look... It's green. There's tradition, and we're breaking tradition today.
All right, Green.
Maybe I shouldn't have broken tradition
Stuff
in the Green episode. I'm so sorry, Green. Do you want to read the card I'm doing this week?
I sure would. Great choice.
Thank you.
We've got a sorcery that's Restore. 1 and a green. Put target land card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control.
Now, class, we're going to restore the environment to its prehistoric, untouched state. On the count of 3, everyone. 1, 2...
Wait, what?
I'm going to count to 3, and when I get to 3...
No, I know what a count of 3 is. I'm not living under a rock. Well, it's a brick roof, so it's more like a sequence of rocks. But we can't just fix everything in the world on a count of 3.
Why not?
Well, you'd have to count a little higher than that.
All right, for our new student, today we'll be using a higher count. So when everyone is ready, I'll start the count again. To 4. 1, 2, 3...
No. 4 won't magically fix it either. Sorry, this isn't going to work. I don't believe in any of this positive manifestation business. Maybe I'm just not cut out for volunteer rubbish collection.
Cut out? Yes, quite. All right, new plan. We're going to cut out the new student's liver and feed it to the sharks.
I beg your pardon?
You're absolutely right. This process is all too slow, but an injection of fresh energy into the ecosystem ought to speed the restoration process up a bit. Ready, class? On the count of 1! Get budgeted!
See, this is exactly the reason why I don't like appearing in Thrifty Thursdays. I get killed pretty consistently.
It's
I
happened
either go on a journey somewhere, or like I get dropped into the weird world of your Thrifty Thursdays imagination land, and I get murdered.
But look, it's very green.
It is
the
very
way
green.
you died is very green.
To be fair, yes, and I do like how I also, wasn't green myself. I didn't believe in any of that positive manifestation stuff.
It was all on me. If you enjoyed that, we release those every Thursday in the Greensboro Commander Community Discord server in the Thrifty Thursdays channel. It's linked in the show notes.
All right, back to green.
Let's do it.
We were very much in green just before, but
we were. We'll
so.
remain in green and talk about green.
More specifically, we're going to talk about green's flaws now.
Oh, sure.
So, I'm going to let loose a little bit. No, I'm kidding. I really do like green. I just don't like playing it in Magic.
No,
but the philosophy's great. So, green believes that things do change. Evolution is part of the value that it holds with like growth. That's naturally occurring, right?
Yeah.
What green can't stand, and I mean cannot fathom it, like really struggles to believe that anyone would do this anyway, is where something with intent, some other, I'm putting this in air quotes because we don't have a video podcast yet, but free thinker
sure.
tries to change the natural world to fit its own goals. This is the thing that really upsets green in like the most primal way.
Look, I think the thing that I was refraining on talking about it earlier because I knew we were going to talk about the flaws, but the natural conclusion that you can draw from some of the things that green is doing is to end up in a version of a political system that is very keen on things remaining the way they are. And I am, of course, talking about conservatism.
Yeah.
Being conservative is a part of the political axes, and conservatives are a real part of the world that we live in. And look,
if you're not familiar with the term conservatism, this is the right wing of politics.
Well, usually. So,
yes.
Yeah, they put it on an axis and associate it with, on the other side, you have liberty. So you have people being
liberalism
liberal
versus
beliefs.
person,
Yeah. It gets very confusing because people then have economical axes they talk about, where there's economical conservatism and economical liberalism.
Yes.
And that's so for instance, in Australia, if you don't know, we have a party called the Liberal Party, which if you're American, you'd go like, oh, that's obviously the left-wing party. Nope. This is our center-right party in Australia, the equivalent of the Republicans in America.
Yep.
They are called the Liberal Party in Australia, and it's because they believe in economic liberalism.
Yeah, we're not talking about like political faults here though.
No.
It's more of a societal thing that we're going to try and focus on here, I think. There's a lot of things that green would have to say in politics, but I would like to continue down the way we live kind of philosophy train. It's a really, really interesting point though. I think that the spectrum of politics is not only one axis, but it can also be an X and a Y axis.
Oh yeah, there's other factors that are equally relevant, but
I think it's a lot more complicated.
Sure, I guess I think it's important to clarify because there are a lot of very right-wing and conservative people who do love Stoic philosophy. You talked about Andrew Tate.
Yes,
there's a lot of people like Andrew Tate online who will espouse what looks like
traditional male values.
Yeah, traditional male values and that kind of thing, which is really just their way of cloaking toxic masculinity. But I think it's worth just being clear that, yes, if your political system is based on things need to stay exactly the way they are, you can justify really, really cruel ways of living in the world by saying, well, unfortunately, that's what we've always done.
And also, that is kind of counterpoint to Green's whole value of growth.
Yes.
It is very, so like tradition and, ancestry and believing all that is important to Green. So, but growth is also just as important. But so like putting traditionalism so hard in society stops growth. Green actually kind of wants growth. If you were to be a full traditionalist, you wouldn't let the forest grow anymore because traditionally it wasn't that big.
Yeah,
do you know what
true.
I mean?
I guess I think it's important to say that this is part of the flaw because you're saying,
and this is the part of the internal struggle that Green has with
absolutely.
itself.
Like taken to an extreme, which is what we've found with all of the colors. When you take their philosophy to an extreme, there is a very much not ideal state that you can reach if you warp the philosophy enough. And I do think that Green's one would resemble conservatism. It's something like, no, things must never ever change. We must never ever think of new ways to do stuff. We must do things the way they were done before. And that can result in, some pretty not ideal circumstances.
Horrible things.
Yeah.
All right, but let's jump back into the whole idea that what makes Green angry?
Sure.
Let's look at that because Mark Rosewater, and again, I've linked his article. It's called "Not Easy Being Green" in the show notes of this episode.
Love the recurring gags that he has.
Yeah.
Seeing red was
True
the red
Blue.
one. True Blue.
Yeah.
Fun.
All of these are great articles, and in the one that he wrote for Green, the two things that he highlights, or we'll go through them, that the whole thing that Green hates, again, just to reiterate after that political discussion, is that it hates when a free thinker, an independent person, changes nature or removes nature or does something to nature that it wasn't meant to happen. And this can happen in two ways. The first is creating something that should or could never have existed naturally.
This is another way that Green is very on the opposite side from Blue.
Yes.
As we know,
directly across the aisle.
Blue loves to make things and tinker and create artifacts. You know, Blue loves artifacts, and Green in general goes, no, things need to be natural. People, animals, flora, fauna, that's it.
Yeah. No buildings, even. If we had my way, we'd live in trees.
Don't build anything. We're all set. Yeah.
Tools are one step too far. Science has gone one step too far by inventing the stone hammer. Look, the second thing that Green gets really upset about, and this is probably the thing that tips it off more, like pushes it over the edge, is when something is inorganically removed from nature. So I do want to highlight here that natural disasters like fires can wipe out entire bushland. Trust us, we're Australians. We know this.
Yep.
This is naturally occurring. Sometimes bushfires can be set off unnaturally, but fires can happen naturally. Even tornadoes, floods, that kind of thing. Green takes no quarrels with this. This is something that happens because that's the way the world balances out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But something that it does take huge problems with is, for example, introducing a new predator to an environment to remove a pest, for example.
Yeah.
That's inorganically, even though you're introducing, let's say, a fox to an environment to get rid of a certain pest that's
rabbits,
mice, field mice, that kind of stuff. That happened again. Trust us, we're Australians. We know this. That happens, and it can have huge damaging effects on the food chain, opportunities for other species to grow, even just us as people. Then, the introduced species that we put into the world to manage something else becomes a pest to us. It becomes a problem for us.
I mean, Green is happy with the natural way things are, but specifically, as we talked about when we talked about tradition, the way things have been.
Yes.
And so, when you introduce a new creature to an ecosystem, yes, eventually it might reach some kind of equilibrium, but Green's going, no, the natural way of things was before we introduced something to where it should not belong.
Yes, and if that animal was to, let's say, spread naturally into a different ecosystem, Green believes that it will naturally level out. Everything will like find its balance anyway.
Yeah.
So don't influence it. Don't do something. And even worse than that, don't remove the ecosystem altogether. Like deforestation for the sake of like, let's look at some areas in Australia where some serious deforestation is happening, specifically to plant trees that are for production purposes. Like they're growing a specific type of wood so they can use that wood in...
I mean, pine wood is the classic
Pine
one,
wood's
right?
a great example,
Pine is used in a lot of construction of houses in particular. And it can be grown very quickly, and to be fair,
chopped down very quickly.
Yes, for the sake of the natural environment, it is a very sustainable resource.
Much more sustainable than
going and chopping down hardwood,
yes.
Or even concrete is not a sustainable resource. Even bricks, there's only so much mud in the world, but pine wood is a very, very sustainable resource. But yes, in order to grow a very unnatural thing, which is massive plantations of pine trees grown in meticulous rows.
Yeah.
You have to remove the natural environment, which is usually an existing forest.
And that usually displaces a bunch of native creatures.
Lots
that
of
will,
them.
have really devastating effects. So even though that we go, oh yeah, pine wood is a naturally occurring material. It's very great for the environment. It's green, sustainable.
Yep.
You can keep growing it. We need to make sure that we take some green advice from the color green and go, okay, well, maybe let's not deforest an existing hardwood forest or a rainforest.
Yeah, let's take the farmland instead and make that into the pine forest. Yeah.
Correct. And so how does all of this result in a flaw? Because, all of this is like an internal struggle within green.
Yeah.
I think it actually results, and Mark Rosewater points it out in his article, just as a kind of a one-off thing, in anger. I think when Green has this, when Green sees this or sees it happening, Green will just be like, right, all of nature's wrath, everything nature has, I'm going to throw at you because how dare you?
Yeah. I mean, look at the way that Green tends to bring games to an end. It's usually an overwhelming stampede, an overrun,
There's a card called Hurricane.
Yeah, like it's the fury of nature is being unleashed on those who are not respecting it. And like to some extent, Green is happy to let things be the way they are. But if people are interfering with things being the way they are, Green is happy to defend itself and is quite trigger happy, I would even say.
I would say it's probably more like it's very instinctual. It's very like, okay, I got to defend my home turf.
Yeah, yeah. If you're encroaching on my territory, then it's natural for me to defend myself. Yeah.
Look, I have another slight hot take, maybe. It differs from Mark's Rosewater's article because Mark didn't really talk about this. But I think Green has another flaw.
Okay.
And it's kind of been obvious the entire time we've been talking about this, but we've not said it properly. I think one of Green's biggest flaws is that it has no goal. It has a way of living, and I love that way of living.
Yeah.
I actually really love stoicism. Like me and Walt read Marcus Aurelius during lockdown to help us get through some shit.
Yeah.
But there's no point to it. There's no like end goal. They're not striving for peace.
No, they're not striving for power. They're not striving for perfection. They're just living.
Not even for freedom.
No.
They actually,
They're happy with things the way they are. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. If we're talking of the philosophy specifically, I think in Commander, as we'll go to later, it plays out a bit differently because
your goal is winning the game.
Yes, and Green is very good at winning the game.
Yes.
But yeah, I think this is kind of back to the same thing again of the conservatism of like, if you do not stand for anything and are happy for things to remain the way they are, you can excuse bad things happening because you're not really working towards anything else, If you're not aiming for, like, you could sort of say, like, when it comes to some of the other colors, yes, red might burn things down, but it's working towards freedom. And yes, blue might make missteps and might take too long, but blue's goal is perfection. And, white is very structured around people and clamps down on what people want to do and how they want to express themselves, but it's doing it with the goal of peace. But when it comes to green, it's kind of like, well, green's happy with things the way they are.
Green's kind of like,
yeah,
it's all good, man.
Green has been on that green.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we've already started talking about the other colors.
Sure.
Should we just dive into enemies and allies?
Let's talk about enemies and allies.
All right, I reckon we start with our allies. Let's look at white because we were just talking about white, and this is now we're looking at the perfect color combination of Walt.
Green and white.
This is it. This is finally your time. I think
my home territory. I think the thing that green and white share in common is a trust in each other. And so the sort of shared theme that emerges is community.
Yeah.
White says we need to create a structure and a web that connects all of us together so that everyone is cared for.
Yeah.
And green goes, absolutely, we're all part of a system. We should be part of a system together.
Yes.
And collectively they go, okay, white goes, I want structure. Green goes, I want a system. And they go, cool, community.
Yeah.
Community is this thing that we do together.
And I think it's really interesting when you look at how those colors would talk about it as well. Like if you were to personify them, green wouldn't necessarily sit down in a meeting room and go, right, I'm going to plan my community.
No.
I'm going to do community planning.
No.
White would.
Yeah.
But green would respect that it's putting in hard work to make it happen. But green believes that community already exists naturally because we are animals. We exist in the natural world. We're animals, so we will naturally have a pecking order. The big buff guy, I'm going to respect a lot because he can beat me up.
Thanks, Garrick.
Yeah.
I think the thing that white lends to green here as well. So the green lends to white because white does offer this structure, which green doesn't usually have.
You can put it on paper is like a big thing.
White goes like, okay, we'll build a community. You know, here's the structure we'll live within. The thing that green offers to white is usually so intent on, I will create this absolutely ideal state and then we will all collectively work towards it. Green goes, no, we are naturally the way we are and we all have a place. We will form a community where each person is within their place.
Yeah.
White, I think, can suffer under this idea of this ideal state where in the end, almost nobody is living the way they really want to.
We talked about that as White's biggest flaw in the Philosophy of White episode.
Yeah.
We talked about like perfection in like having a perfect world and a perfect community is nigh impossible.
Yes.
How long has the human race been around and we've been trying all these different political structures?
Well,
none of which have worked perfectly.
No, and so White turns to things like religion and like political systems as their kind of like ways to structure us all, but often those systems fail us, whereas I think Green goes, no, we can be in a community. Like we're not talking about a system, we're talking about people living with each other.
Individuals connecting to other individuals.
Yeah, we can have a system, but each person will still live the way they truly want to. And I think they kind of complete each other in this way, where Green on its own, when it looks at community, yes, as you say, is talking about natural systems and like, I'll find my place. And it's like, well, maybe you have to look for it.
It's funny. I'm going to make a very good segue to Green's other ally here, Red.
Okay.
White and Green are a match made in heaven in terms of they are this kind of like, even, White brings that religious kind of holy aspect of all people living in harmony.
Yeah.
Green and Red are a match made in nature. Yeah. And that's the thing that they share in common. I think when Green looks at Red, Green looks at a truly wild being. And that is what Green loves. Green loves everything that just like is actually wild and acts on impulse and passion. And look, while Green may be a little bit more, I'm going to say instinctual than impulsive.
Yeah.
Because I think Red is impulsive and that generally puts Red in a bit of danger sometimes or puts maybe others in danger is the key thing here.
Yeah.
Green is a little bit more instinctual where it's like, okay, how do I feel about this? And is it right for me now? Is it right for those around me? Is it right for the world?
Interesting. I think I differ slightly on this, where I actually think that instinctual is the overlap between the two of them. I think that Green, when it's looking at the world, is going, I accept things the way they are, and I know my place within it. Red is impulsive, as you say. I must go and get the things I want. I must live my life right now. I think the thing they have in common is instinct. I think that Green goes, I know that my impulses are natural, and Red goes, yeah, me too.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to differentiate on is how they then process those emotions, because the stoicism in Green, the stoicism philosophy is about, okay, everything in the world is affecting me. How do I react to that? And how do I navigate the world with, remember those four pillars, the wisdom, the integrity, and the courage. Whereas Red is like, fuck all that noise. I'm gonna do it anyway.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Red's not concerned with the stoicism part. So I was trying to trying to differentiate those two things.
There's a level of distance there where red is not necessarily one to question things or even to interpret things. Like red just goes, I feel the way I feel and I'm going to do something right now. Where green, I think, does have that level of distance. It goes, I have natural instincts, but there are things that will get in the way of that. And there are distractions. Yeah. And I need to be separate from these distractions. Yeah. And that's where we got that stoicism from, where red goes like, no, that's normal.
Yeah.
I'm distracted, that's good.
Sure, that's part of the world. Let's go.
But the overlap here absolutely is that they are living in tune with who they truly are. They're both looking inwards, I think. Yeah. Red goes, I feel the way I feel and that's okay. And green goes, I am who I am and that's okay. There's a lot of acceptance and a lot of being who you truly are that they both are happy to do.
And I think that when they talk to each other, that's the thing that they give each other, right? Is this comfort, this like weird encouragement and freedom and this liberalism. Like you look at the Gruul clans, they live like wild beasts, because they're just living for living and, they live out in the wilds. And I think that when, I don't want to say they're a bunch of hippies sat in a circle. That's not what I'm trying to do. Because like Selesnya sound more like the hippies, but like green and red are really, for me, the kind of two colors that exist for, I don't want to say exist for themselves because black is the one that exists for itself, but they are the colors that, I think you put it really well, when they look inwards.
Yeah.
And they really care about how they fit in with themselves. And green is just the one that cares about how they fit in with the rest of the world.
I think they're both, and the way we see the Gruul clans on Ravnica, which is the main way we've seen green-red obviously play out in Magic, is that I think they're much more active than green would be on their own because they're actively going, we want the world to be wild. Like they will burn down structures to make it that way.
I think this is the thing that red gives green, right?
It's the action.
It's the fire in the belly. Yeah. It's the thing that makes them do stuff.
Yeah.
And it green, if you were to manifest a conversation between the two of them, red might be like, hey green, did you hear that they're like tearing down this forest to build a new building?
Yeah.
And green's like, oh, yeah, that's really upsetting. It's really sad, but we'll deal with it. We've got other forests, and maybe we can ask them to put some plants in the foyer.
Yeah.
And Red's like,
no,
burn down the building.
We got to get them right now, bro. Yeah.
I think that would be the conversation that they have.
Red, I think, pulls green out of its quite stagnant place because red is so about action.
Yeah, maybe green is more complacent.
Yeah, I would say so. Okay, and then enemies.
Let's look across the aisle. Yeah, I think let's look at blue first, shall we?
Sure.
I think the thing that is common between black and blue is that these are the selfish colors. Like, whereas red can be very selfish. Not, it's very about what they want.
Yeah.
But blue is about this thirst for knowledge and like it wants more. It wants to know everything.
It wants perfection, and most of all, it wants perfection for itself.
Yes. And black doesn't want perfection. It wants power. Yeah. Mostly for itself. So this is the thing that they have in common. So blue, when green looks at blue, or actually you put it really well earlier, the nature versus nurture thing.
Yeah, it comes up a lot in blue versus green, I think.
Like when you combine those two colors, you really do see it. You see, like, look at Ravnica again. Let's look at the Simic Combine.
Sure.
Green is the creatures, and blue is the mutation of those creatures.
Well, blue goes, I want to reach perfection. Yes. I need to achieve perfection, and it uses green as the way of going, like, I'm going to perfect nature. Not nature the way it was supposed to be. I'm going to make it better.
Yes, and this is the really interesting thing. Green and blue have a weird respect for each other because they're both about growth and about, that. But green hates the fact that blue is interfering with this.
Yeah.
Like, maybe, okay, let's look at the Sharkdo crab card, right? Maybe in a million years, sharks and crabs will be able to evolve and mutate and become the Sharkdo crab.
But green wants to wait for that to happen.
Correct. Blue's like, nah, let's put him in a gene splicing machine and make this abomination happen now.
It's really contextualizing how slow green is willing to be, that blue looks fast by comparison.
Yes. The fact that blue looks so quick when we talked about blue being one of the flaws of blue was the fact that it thinks too much.
Too long and too much, yeah.
This should show you just how willing green is to let things take its course.
What will be, will be.
What will be, will be.
It's definitely, and you see a lot of this in the sort of opposition between green and blue, where blue is so keen to build. You know, there's so many artifact cards
Libraries.
in blue.
Libraries are a structural thing that green is like, okay, libraries, you know, sure, but green is more about, okay, why don't we tell each other the stories? Why don't we exist in the cave and paint on the wall and that kind of stuff? Whereas blue is like, no, we got to document this. There's got to be...
Green's going, there's nothing in these books that I don't already know.
Yes.
I don't need to read any of this
I've already lived it.
Yeah. I've been out there. Everything I need to know, I already know from living in the world.
This is the true difference between wisdom and intelligence.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
is straight up the streetwise green versus the book smarts blue.
And again, the nature versus nurture comes up, where blue is like, I can learn anything I need to possibly learn, and green's like, I already knew all that.
Yeah, 100%.
I was born that way. Yeah.
All right, black.
Black. I think that the main thing that black offers that green really can't stand is death. We talked about it in the black episode. This is the lengths black is willing to go to, right? Black will do anything for power, including the one thing that pretty much every color is mostly opposed to, which is killing.
Yes.
Black has a card called murder on it and go for the throat. Black is like, nope, I need it now. I'm going to kill. And green is all about life, and life ending unnaturally because of murder is the thing that's the issue here. Green is happy for things to die.
Yeah, see, I was just about to say that. You pointed out something very key there. It was like things ending unnaturally.
Yeah.
And
because things can die. And you'll see cards in green with skeletons rotting.
Yes.
And these kind of things, you know, things being returned to the world.
So I'm going to quote Lion King. It's part of the great circle of life. That's totally fine for green.
Yeah.
But black influences death and even goes as far to raise it from the grave. And like green is like
hates that.
Green is all about new life. Like that's great. And even sometimes we get green black cards, like in the Golgari, we get green black cards. What's the card with flashback that reanimates something?
Oh, Diagraph Rebirth.
Diagraph Rebirth.
Yeah.
That's a great green black card for reanimation.
Yeah.
So you can see that green's like, yeah, life. But inside, green's like, that thing was dead. It should have stayed dead.
See, I feel like because a lot of the time when you talk about two colors working together, it's usually one means with one ends from the other. And I think that when black and green team up, it's usually black means through... black ends via green means.
Yeah.
Because I think that green in general, like green does interact with the graveyard, and we'll talk about this when we talk about Commander, but you know, there are cards like Regrowth and like Eternal Witness. Like green is happy to bring things back that have died, but it never brings them to the battlefield.
Yeah,
straight from the graveyard.
It has to be reborn. It has to be cast again or go back into the world by being put back onto the top of the library. Or
you don't see green zombies. There are no green zombies. Green is not happy with unnatural means of returning life or prolonging life. Green wants life to naturally come back again.
Yeah, and like natural magic, like you look at the difference between the art on cards like Regrowth, and then you look at cards like, you know, Reanimate.
Or Raise Dead.
Yeah. The art should tell you what kind of magic is being used. Green is harnessing the power of the soil to bring life from the trees back into this sapling that'll grow again and become free. Whereas black's like, nah, this is my magic. It's coming from me and I will rip you out of the ground.
There's a really interesting aspect of cheating here where green is willing for the creature to come back, but it has to come to your hand first and be re-summoned. Like it requires that mana be used again.
It's much more fair. It's much more about
and it feels more natural, right?
Yes.
The mana pays for the creature comes back. That's the fair way of doing things in the natural way.
It's the difference between rebirth, which is green, and reanimation, which is black.
Black is really happy. And, you know, we talked about when we talk about black, like paying life for things, and black... well, you know, like Reanimate the card.
Yeah,
it's an unfair card because you cheat the mana cost and you pay life to do it. Like this is the complete opposite of what green is willing to do.
And I think that when it plays out, the two colors, they work well together.
They do
in this graveyard area and life. The cycle of life and death, it works really well together.
Yeah.
But they green despises what black is trying to do.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that makes them enemies. It's like they work well together in the cycle, the great circle of life.
Yeah.
But green despises why black is trying to do it
Yeah.
and how it goes about it sometimes.
I think there's a really, really big difference when you look at the ally colors versus the enemy colors in terms of the amount of inborn conflict that is there. That a lot of the enemy colors have elements of sort of clashing together and things kind of being like grappling with different things because they are opposing philosophies being thrown together, where the allied colors are really like, oh, I see what you're doing, let's team up.
Yeah.
You know, it's really different.
We're kind of on the same wavelength. I respect that.
I think we can kind of work towards the same goal.
Yeah,
you know?
compromise just a little bit and we can get there.
Whereas I do feel that, Mark Rosewater talks about this a lot, where when you do get two colors together, often there is one goal from one of the colors and the means from the other. I think especially enemy colors, it tends to be a dominating color going, I will use the tools that you have access to. And I think black is the dominant color in that duality.
100%. Yeah, green rolls over to black in those areas. All right, let's talk about, finally, Commander.
Yeah,
let's talk about
it. It's a Commander podcast.
It's a Commander podcast, and we always save this bit till last because it's the thing that we get most excited about.
Yeah,
we're going to talk about how green feels in Commander, what kind of things that you learn from green when you get given this philosophy in the form of a piece of cardboard wrapped in plastic in your hand. I think that you play more green, firstly, than I do.
I do play a lot of green.
But you have spoken about on multiple episodes of this podcast across all, I think this is 80 episodes now. Very exciting.
Far out.
You have spoken about the inevitability of green a lot. And I think that this is such a perfect encapsulation because the thing that we were talking about with green, about growing and all this kind of stuff, if you leave it alone long enough, it will win.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that green is so opposed to death because the thing that ends the inevitability of green is usually a board wipe.
Yeah.
Green is so, like, I play my Mowu Loyal Companion deck, and when I'm introducing the deck to the table, I go, look, it's going to do typical green things. It's going to make some massive creatures. You're going to have to deal with them. If you board wipe, I'll probably lose.
Yep.
Like, this is the kind of thing of the inevitability of green is that, like, if you kind of put all the 5 colors individually at a table and none of them ever interact with one another, I think green is in a very, very strong likelihood of winning that game. Like, I think
if nobody
touches the other colors, I think it's out of red and green. Red would empty its hand and have the fastest start, but green just playing a creature every turn and turning those creatures sideways, you know, like Gigantosaurus.
Yeah.
If you don't have a removal spell, what are you going to do with a 5-mana 10/10? How are you ever going to attack through that? How are you ever going to block that successfully? Green has this inevitability of just like, if I just empty my hand every turn, you will lose. I don't think you can beat green if it gets to do this.
I think the thing that I love to focus on here is the fact that, like, usually one creature can't kill you, but if you put enough of them down, and if you start growing them with +1 counters, which +1 counters is like one of green's specialty mechanics.
It's my Mowu Loyal Companion deck is built entirely around it.
100%. And you see Walt, when he plays Mowu, it's like most of the time I watch you play Mowu, you are just turning dice around to show that you're putting more counters on things, counters on things.
Unbelievable how effectively green does this.
Yeah, and it's like, that is the feeling of green. Is like one creature on turn 1, another creature on turn 2, maybe 2 creatures on turn 3. And it's like this snowball effect, which, funnily enough, a big avalanche is very green. It's natural. It's that snow has built up because it fell from the sky, and then the mountain couldn't hold it, so it will crash down, and boom, there goes a bunch of trees.
Well, and this is the win con, right? We spoke about Overrun. Like, usually the way that green brings the game to an end is it just develops enough things, and then it just goes, okay, they've been unleashed. I'm unleashing the power of nature, and Overrun. Like, I won the game on stream the other day with the card Overrun. Like, I know people love Overwhelming Stampede. I'm not comparing them. I think it's a much stronger, a way higher ceiling on that card.
Well, firstly, Overrun is also 3 green pips. Overwhelming Stampede is 2, which I
discovered the other day. It was a very painful discovery. But, you know, like, and even Craterhoof obviously is probably better even than Overwhelming Stampede. It depends on the deck, but usually better. But even just Overrun, this card's been reprinted like 30 times. It just says 5 mana, creatures get +3/+3 and gain trample.
It's also got like Kamal Heart of Krosa is overruns on
every
a stick.
turn. Yeah. It is unbelievable how often just like 10 creatures of any power, if they get +3/+3 and trample, it's just like, I kill James.
Yep.
James is dead.
And it's so cool when you run any deck in Commander, if you've got green in it and you've got creatures in it, you could go, sure, I could slip an overrun effect type thing into this deck and it still might win. Like
totally.
Any color combination you think of, like white-green. Oh my god, overrun effects in white-green are great.
They become so much better.
Even, like, I'm thinking about, like, your Merrin deck in green-black, enemy colors.
Yeah.
Overrun works, like, very well.
It's still valid in that in that deck, absolutely. I think this is the thing that I enjoy. Well, there's two things I enjoy a lot about playing green in Commander when it's in conjunction with another color. One is that I always have access to overrun effects. So when it comes to trying to win the game,
you know that there's a win con available to you.
If I'm going wide, I know I'll be able to end the game. That's a no-brainer. The other thing is ramp. Having access to land ramp in Commander is so good. My Casilda and Lear deck is kind of built around the fact that on turn 2, there are enough spells that just say, go get a basic or go get a forest, put it onto the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library, that I can like fix my colors pretty much every time. The mana base in that deck is not very good, but it's fine because of the ramp that green gives you access to.
Yeah, I mean, like, for God's sakes, it's called rampant growth for a reason.
Yeah,
like it's
rampant.
Green is the most connected color to the lands.
Yeah.
So naturally, green produces more mana than any other color. Like you look at cards like Nyx Bloom Ancient.
Oh yeah.
Oh my god, like just having magic that exists within the lands itself when our whole game revolves around using magic that land gives you know that the green cards are going to do better because they are the lands, you know?
Totally. I mean, even when it comes to like just having lots of mana in general, like they printed, I think it was a mistake, but old Gnawbone.
Oh, stupid
the creature that says,
card.
whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. Absurd.
Yeah.
And I would argue a color break. But they clearly know that, like, okay, if a color is going to get access to just like a million mana, it's going to be green.
It has to be green. And like, look at Channel, for example. Channel it's a banned card in Commander, but good example.
Straight up.
I think that for me, the thing about building with green, I'm so happy that I always have Cultivate, Kadama's Reach, even like, you know, like you said just before, the 2 mana fixing...
Rampant Growth, Nature's Law, Farseek, 3 Visits. Like, those 4 spells are the foundational mana fixing and ramp in so many decks out there.
If anything, if you are in green, if you are in a 5-color deck, run more forests.
Yeah, so you can have more of
just
that
play
ramp.
those effects. They're so much better than anything else.
I really, truly feel that unless you have a very strong reason to, if you are building a green deck and you're looking for your ramp, you should just play only the sorceries that go get spells out of your deck. Yep. Unless you are explicitly building an artifact deck. So for instance, my old Golem deck, my Selesnya Golem deck, it did originally have a Cultivate in there, and then I ended up kind of going, no, actually, I need a lot of artifacts in here. I'm going to play my Signets, I'm going to play my Talismans. But in general, if in the absence of other factors, if you're building a deck and you are in green and you're looking for your ramp, just play Rampant Growth, play Farseek, play Nature's Law. It's so hard to go wrong.
Yeah. I'm going to point something out here, which is really interesting from a philosophy perspective.
Sure.
You pointed out that like in that green-white deck that was artifact focused, green was so like, sure, we'll land ramp. And then you, as the pilot, you as the player, had to be like, no, actually, I don't want to use the really good green stuff because I'm trying to do something else. Green's clearly fighting with that.
Oh, yeah.
And that brings me to my next point. How amazing the removal in green, specifically for artifacts and enchantments.
Oh, yeah.
Nature's Claim, Wilt, Return to Nature, Croson Grip, Reclamation Sage, the list goes on and on and on.
Acidic Slime even.
Acidic Slime, it's like second to none. Like white can maybe do it a little bit better sometimes. Red does artifact removal good as well. But like, oh my god, it's plentiful.
You will certainly never run out of options to choose from. Like, if you're chasing efficiency, you have your Nature's Claim. If you're chasing modality, you have your Return to Nature. Even the new, what's the green spell they printed just the other day?
Archdruid's Charm.
Archdruid's Charm. This is the one that can exile an artifact or enchantment or tutor any land to your battlefield, or it fights or something, or you gain life. I can't remember
you have a target creature bite something.
I think it's a bite something.
But like, even that, for example, like green's removal for creatures in these fight effects and all that kind of stuff.
They're getting better and better. The quality of the average fight effect.
One of my favorite cards at the moment is Ram Through.
Oh, I won this game the other day that we were playing, not on stream. I almost said that on stream. We were playing Spell Table with one of our patrons, and someone clearly had mana open, was able to fog or do something. I could tell if I attacked with everything, there was going to be some kind of ramification. Maybe my stuff would die. And so I had like a 58-58, no trample, but I was like, there was like an 11-11 on the defending player's board, and it had trample. Yeah. It was like an 11-11 on the defending player's board, and they were at like 30 life, and I was like, Ram Through? I don't need to attack.
Have you got anything? Yeah, Ram Through is so good. Like, but even green goes so well with neutralizing. Naturalizing is what I'm going to say here.
Sure.
Like, for example, Song of the Dryads. This is the enchantment that enchants any permanent, and it becomes a colorless forest.
Yeah.
You literally turn something into a tree.
Yeah.
That is so strong. Like 3 mana, any permanent.
Yeah.
It hits problematic lands, it hits planeswalkers, it hits battles if you give a damn about them.
Yeah.
Like anything you need.
Song of the Dryads is the most versatile of these, but Kenra's transformation, outstanding.
Yep.
Even cards like Lignify, this is the one where a creature becomes an 0/4 with no other abilities. Like, doing any of this to someone's commander can just kind of semi-permanently answer them.
It's backbreaking.
Yeah.
And I think that, it's such a good color to be in for these kind of like just well-rounded packages of the green removal removes the stuff that green doesn't want in its way.
Yeah.
It removes artifacts really well. It removes blocking creatures really well. That's what I love about green, is that its removal suite is very in line with its strategy as well. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. I think if we're talking about like looking at singular colors and when they come into Commander, I think it's interesting that we are yet to describe a weakness of green.
Yeah, well, I mean,
like, it's so rare. Pretty much every other color we get to ramp and we go, oh, they have to use artifacts.
Yeah.
Or, we get to removal and we're in red and we go, well, you never answer an enchantment except for Chaos Warp. Green just has the weaknesses green has are so small in comparison to the weaknesses that some other colors have. White can't finish a game,
Can't draw cards.
Yeah. Blue really struggles to deploy really great threats. These are things that are pretty backbreaking if you're building a monocolor deck in Commander. In green, what are you even talking about? Like, you have maybe a slight problem with dealing with creatures, but even then, fight effects are getting better and better every day.
And also, just swinging bigger creatures means that they either block and lose their creature, or they take damage and lose the game.
I truly think the only legitimate, sizable weakness that green has after playing a lot of mono green is that it just folds to a board wipe.
Yeah.
If you don't have specifically heroic intervention, which I honestly would argue is maybe a bit of a color break.
It's a white card in my opinion.
I don't think it's green to make things indestructible.
Even if you look at a lot of the art on it as well, it's a Johnny on the art, which kind of annoys me.
Hexproof is a very green keyword, I would say. We have cards like Snakeskin Veil and things like that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
You can give things indestructible with things like, what's the 3-mana instant? Inspiring Call.
Inspiring Call, draw a card for each +1 counter. Draw a card for each creature with a +1 counter on it. They gain indestructible or something like that.
Yeah, so indestructible can be done. I think I like that feels like less of a break because it cares about the +1 counters specifically.
Yeah, it has to be strong already.
Yeah, but giving things like instant speed, 2 mana, indestructible, and hexproof, that is a white card to me.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting that you were saying about that's the only weakness that green has. I think what I was saying before about how all of green's removal supports its strategy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
Whereas white, for example, white's great at board wipes. We know this. Wrath of God is a friggin' great card. But Wrath of God is everyone.
Yeah.
White is also trying to build a community of little 1/1 soldiers, but it blows itself up. Whereas all of green's removal is about
synergizes with itself.
And it's very good at targeting and very good at being right, this specific thing's the problem. That I'm going to target that.
I've spoken about it a bit on the podcast, but I'm brewing a Gandalf the White deck. And in order to make the Wrath of Gods that you are so good at casting in white good, you have to have another spell. In a way
you have to have the Teferi's Protection as well.
Yeah, or even, what's the 4-mana instant? You return all permanents that were put into the battlefield.
Brought? back?
No, that gets two things. There's a 4-mana one that it's like reward for
Fate's Reward.
Fate's Reward. Thank
Great
you.
card.
But you have to have those two things. Like, yes, the color synergizes with itself, but you have to have them both. Green just does such generically valuable things on its own. Like, the other day we were playing on stream and Brad cast, what's that ridiculous 5-mana creature? It's a 6/6 with Vigilance, Reach, and Trample.
Elder Gargaroth. This thing is stupid.
Like, this card can
tell
win.
Me power creep doesn't exist when this 6/6 for 5 mana has Vigilance, Reach, and Trample.
And more text on it.
Every
time it attacks or blocks, you choose one, you make a beast, you draw a card, or you...
I
forget what the other mode is, but even just those two.
It's stupid.
It's a 5-mana 6/6 that makes bodies or draws you cards.
It's silly.
Like, this is what I mean about green, where there are cards that are so generically valuable on their own. And this is probably a problem, and I think that design have moved away from this in green a bit recently, is that it's too much.
It's good at everything.
Green should not be good at everything, because every color has to have weaknesses, and green's weaknesses are just too small at the moment.
And I think green's weakness... And like we could look at CDH at the moment for like how green is getting a bit worse, because Sans Green's decks are the top of the meta. Like green is like not really experiencing any Mana Dorks are bad now in CDH because of Bowmasters. We're looking at ramp when we're talking about how great green ramp is. Green ramp is too slow in CDH. We'd rather use the artifact stuff and the explosive red rituals or the explosive black
rituals too.
Black rituals. Yeah. I think that you can look at the power level difference within casual and CDH, and I think green and CDH is just too slow, too traditional, I think.
It's interesting that it's kind of coming back to the philosophy again, where I think that green is unbelievably consistent at what it does, but the peaks are lower. Like we talked about it with some of the other colors. We talked about black's peaks, where it was like, cards like Bolas's Citadel and Necropotence are like some of the most powerful cards in our game. Even Vampiric Tutor and Demonic Tutor.
Heard of Yawgmoth's Will?
I think the average green card is so good, but I think the best green cards are not quite there. Like, yes, we've got our Sylvan Libraries and Nature's Claim. The removal's really good. But when you lose green in a CDH deck,
you don't feel it as much.
Not nearly as much as cutting black or cutting red.
Black or blue or red, you notice that you don't have Dockside. You notice that you don't have Force of Will.
You notice you don't have Tutors. You notice that you don't have Gamble, makes a big difference.
And I think that let's talk about how good green is in casual at supporting the other colors very quickly.
I think it's very close between it and white as the best support color.
Yes.
I think what it offers to your deck is so big.
Just alone with what I was saying about ramp. If you are in green, you've got a ramp package immediately.
And removal. Black, red, and blue all struggle to deal with enchantments. Green's just I got that.
Sure, we'll run my stuff. Look, white wants to build an army. Green has the creatures and the buffs to back it up.
Yep, and white will offer green the protection that green is lacking. White-green is a great combo.
Correct, I mean, I don't play it a lot. But you have fun.
I love it.
Green, blue. Blue wants to advance science. Green has the lessons from the past to advise it and the creatures to mutate. Black wants power. Green has the might of animals and the obediency to do black's bidding. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Red wants to burn down the house. Red does as well. Green does as well. Green is sure, red. I don't like that house either.
Let's do it. Houses suck. Where's the trees?
Yeah. All right. Look, at the end of all of these episodes, I kind of give a couple of lessons, 3 lessons that we've learned from green, and then kind of a more cautious lesson.
Sure.
So, first lesson, we cannot always directly change the world, but we can change how we believe. Sorry, that's wrong. How we behave in the world. We can also change how we believe it. Believe it exists. That's the Logos. Virtues of wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage can be keys to spreading the ways of peaceful lives. When left alone, nature will rule. And finally, we must have somewhere to go, otherwise we may end up doing nothing, and we must maintain our belief in acceptance to concede that others may not accept the world as we do. Otherwise, we become what we least desire. So, Space Commanders, command received!
All 5 colors are now understood. However, I am not satisfied. I shall return.
What?
Okay.
That came out of left field. Actually chills. I actually got chills. That's creepy.
We do not hear from that Space Commander in these episodes.
So
that's our usual Space Commander.
I thought we were done. I thought that was the 5 colors. We're done now.
Apparently not. Oh, man. Okay.
More to go.
Yeah, tune in. I'm not going to say next week, but soon. I think he's not going to let that slide for too long.
That's how... Oh, do you reckon... Okay, theory. The other Space Commander that cared about philosophy...
Sure.
He's now reported back to the head honcho.
Oh, with his findings.
Yeah, now the head honcho's got like something else for us.
I hate all of this. Anyway, listeners, do you feel commanded? Are you scared? What do you think of green, and which color do you align with now that we've done all 5?
Yeah, and you can talk to us about it at length on all of our social platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, at Get Commanded on all of those. I would really love to talk to you all about this. And if you want to watch us play with green cards, you can do so at twitch.tv/getcommanded and join our community Discord, Greensboro Commander Community Discord server. It's the best way to chat with us about philosophy. Trust me, if you get me talking about this topic, I will keep going.
Yes.
So if you want to get in touch, do it on all of those ways.
That's the best way to do it. And of course, we would be lost without our patrons over on Patreon. It's linked in the show notes if you'd like to support the Get Commanded podcast directly and the things that we do. We'd like to thank our patrons Stella Tam, Fuzzy, Bottomless Potamus, and Dyer. And an extra special shout out to Fletcher Cutting and Wizard Down Under, who support us in the Space Commander tier. You're the best.
You are the best, and also the best. Palms Off Gaming.
Yeah.
Not only for sponsoring this podcast, but for providing all of those awesome giveaways for our poll remembrance.
Very generous. We did not expect so much. So thank you so much, Palms Off.
We're expecting like some sleeves.
Yeah, maybe.
Deck box plus a binder plus inners. That's great.
Heaps for you to choose from.
These guys are awesome. They make awesome stuff, which you can win by going and giving us some feedback in the link in the description of this episode. You can check them out at palmsoffgaming.com.au/#getcommanded, and you can receive 10% off everything. So if you win that giveaway, you get a Genesis deck box and you go, you know what? I want all my decks in these boxes now. You can go get 10% off, support us at the same time. It does mean a lot and helps out the podcast a lot as well.
Absolutely. palmsoffgaming.com.au/#getcommanded.
All right. That was a big episode.
It was.
Look, we're going to planeswalk this week.
Yeah. I think it's important that we preface this and say usually we planeswalk to pretty merry places in our lives. We felt that it was important that we talk about something that's happening in the world at large.
Yeah, something right now that is affecting thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people.
Yeah, and it's really, really important that something is done about it. We are, of course, talking about Palestine and the ongoing genocide that's being inflicted by Israel on the Palestinian people. I'm sure that all of you are aware of it. It's pretty hard to escape from it these days. I know over on social media, it's everywhere. And it's in the news.
Hard. It's horrible stuff to watch. There are some very hateful things being thrown out into the internet, and like Walt and I obviously are not trying to spread any anti-Semitic hatred.
No, definitely not.
This is something that we care a lot about for the fact that there are people dying, there are children dying because of some really horrific reasons, and some things that we can't even understand.
No.
Like there are unobtainable ideas and logics that just don't make sense.
They don't make sense. Look, I don't think there's any justification for killing children.
No.
And there's an extraordinary number of children who've been killed. It's absolutely atrocious. And we are going to go against some of that philosophy I was talking about earlier of sitting back and letting things be. I don't think that's right to do with something as horrible as this. I think you just absolutely must do something about it. We're going to provide a few ways that you can influence things. Don't feel that you have to do all of these things, but I think you should do at least one. The first one I want to suggest is probably the most direct way you can influence it. You can donate money. I've linked a couple of places in the show notes. I've personally donated to Heal Palestine, which is
also donated to Heal Palestine.
Yep. So they're an organization that are looking specifically at healing Palestine, of rebuilding and of helping
providing
people,
money towards infrastructure, food,
making sure that people are actually directly being looked after. My partner Electra every Sunday goes to a protest in the city of Melbourne. I know that pretty much every city around the world, with how the scale of what's going on, there will be a protest near you.
Can I jump in here just with the protest stuff? I'm always someone to advocate, if you want to go protest, go protest.
Yep.
I just want to put out a message to be safe. Really keep yourself safe. Go to protests where there are, people there to keep you safe.
Yeah.
Go show your support. That's super important. But it is a very hate-filled discussion that is very toxic in the world at the moment.
Yeah.
So I just want everyone out there to be safe.
Totally. Be very safe in yourself. And look, to be completely honest, the reason that I do some of the other things on this list is that for me personally, because of my life and my upbringing and particularly my anxiety, protests are not a great place for me. I've been to a few before and
they're intense.
I can be there. It's a very intense place to be. So I understand if it's not somewhere you can get to. Totally understandable.
But you could also, and this is something that, we're looking at doing, is writing to local government representatives.
Yep.
Calling for a ceasefire
Absolutely.
is probably the biggest thing that you could ask for in these letters.
Definitely.
There are countless countries that have unanimously called for a ceasefire.
Yeah.
But there are still people and countries on the whole that are saying, no, we're not going to ask for a ceasefire from Israel.
So more pressure is needed.
More pressure and more voices saying that is the right thing to do means that more people believe it is the right thing to do.
Well, eventually they won't be able to drown it out. They can't stick their fingers in their ears forever. And the more that we talk about it, the more that they'll have to do something about it. And speaking of talking about it, the last thing you can do, I do think this list probably goes from most to least important, arguably, but I do think you can still post about it on social media. You just don't know the effect you might have on the people around you. Like, there might be someone who is not necessarily clued into what's going on in Palestine. And, maybe it's not just your post, but if everyone they know is posting about Palestine, they're bound to learn something about it. And they might go to a protest. They might donate some money. We absolutely must not stop talking about this thing because it's absolutely atrocious what's going on and something needs to be done about it.
It's honestly a really horrible thing to have to, on a podcast where we get to talk about the game that we love to play, where we feel like we want to put this kind of thing at the end of it, you should take that as a sign that this is something that you can't ignore.
No.
It's something that is happening, and because it's not happening on our doorstep, and, these aren't people that even look like us, there are events in the world that happen and get the West's attention very quick because they look like us.
Yeah.
Palestinians are just like us. They're you're not saying Palestinian and thinking of another species of animal that's getting destroyed in a rainforest.
We're all
These
people.
are humans that are mothers, fathers, children's, husbands, wives, people that are being killed on the daily, and it needs to stop.
Absolutely needs to stop. So we need to do something about it. So we're very sorry to end it on a somber note, but we just felt we couldn't not say anything any longer. So I hope you'll bear with us on that one. And please, yes, do any of those things we just said. Donate some money, go to a protest, write to your local government representative, post about it on social media. I've linked 2 resources in the show notes of this episode. One is Heal Palestine directly, if you'd like to donate. I also linked a Google Doc. That one just has a bunch of different resources about where you can donate money. It has a particular website linked there where you can look for protests that are happening in your local area. There's just a bunch of different things that you might want to learn about if you want to do something about it.
Yeah. Spread love, not hate. Let's, we'll end it there.
Yep, absolutely. So we'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Commanders.
Goodbye, Commander players.